Good morning. The September 7th Board of Education meeting is now in session. Please rise for the invocation. We have no invocation. No. All right. Well, we'll move to the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2.03 is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. Item 2.04 is to establish the agenda order, and the agenda stands as published. Item 2.05 are recognitions, and we do not have any recognitions today. Item 2.06, Educator of the Month, Mrs. Hummer.
Excuse my voice. I'm rather raspy this morning. Today, the Board of Education honors an educator in our school system who has given her students an awesome experience, one that's value is immeasurable and one that will surely last a lifetime. Jennifer Davidson, history teacher at Southern High School, has made history come alive in a unique way. She was the driving force to plan and execute an oral history project showcasing the accounts of military veterans serving in the Vietnam War. Her work combined the efforts of local, state, and national agencies and community members to bring history into a living experience. Jennifer and her students built a bridge of understanding for Vietnam vets that experienced decades of harsh political unpopularity. Her students have captured the essence of these military personnel and enhanced the lives of all stakeholders involved. Mrs. Davidson admitted that she always struggled with this controversial unit in the curriculum. I never knew how to handle Vietnam, she said in a recent article that appeared in the spring issue of Humanities magazine. The daughter and granddaughter of men who served in the Vietnam era, she was struck that she never heard veterans telling stories about the war. My grandfather was a veteran of Korea and Vietnam, and he didn't talk about it. When he died in 2015, Jennifer decided that the stories of that era were not to be lost. Family stories and service memorabilia at her grandfather's funeral spurred her determination to make a Vietnam unit more meaningful for her students. Incorporating Southern's signature program, Design, Preservation, and Innovation, she worked with the signature coordinator to offer her students real-world experiences and skills that would carry them through life while preserving the history of Maryland veterans. Collaborating with the professionals from the Martha Ross Center for Oral History at UMBC, the Maryland Humanities Council, and representatives from Maryland Public Television, Ms. Davidson put together a student-filmed and student-edited documentary that one of her students called Life-Changing. The 30 Maryland Vietnam vets who participated in the oral history project told stories about their war experience that no student would ever read in a textbook. The vets remembered leeches, oppressive heat and humidity, the monsoons, triple canopy jungles, being attacked in the dark, the beauty of the landscape, and friends who didn't make it home. Students learned crucial skills in phone etiquette, working with senior citizens, letter writing, and the importance of a thank you note as they preserved history while making history. Jennifer Davidson, you've made history come alive for your students. Through your leadership, your students truly understand the experiences of American soldiers, and you've made a critical impact on their lives. Last spring, I had the honor with two of my boys to go to the presentation at Southern High School and see snippets of the documentary and see the vets that came out and how meaningful it was for them to take part in this. And it was truly one of those educational experiences that gives you chills that came through for this. This was an amazing project for all these students, and Ms. Davidson truly created an amazing, powerful opportunity for their students and for these vets. So on behalf of the Board of Education, the students, teachers, and staff of Anne Arundel County Public Schools, we are honored to recognize you Educator of the Month for September 2016. Congratulations. Please join me up front. in line, but it really was an amazing project, and my boys were really moved by it as well. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all you do. Oh, I'm sorry. Who's here with you? I saw a big crowd coming in.
Saw my principal, Katie Pierhardy, is here. My husband came. My department chair, Todd Smith, and the three women, I guess, that really kind of were my support for this whole thing. We have Deb Kurtz across the hall, who was constantly there for me, and Megan Renievich, who she was just amazing for everything. She was there throughout the whole thing. And then, of course, we have Judy Dobbs from the Maryland Humanities.
And I have to say, when they were presenting it, and they were some of the researchers who helped them with this for the project said that these students, who were mostly sophomores, right?
They were freshmen.
Freshmen. He said that they were doing work on caliber of his of his college students with the research and things they did. So they had amazing guidance and training for this beforehand. So it was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will ask you to stay around for pictures after the break. Item 2.07 is Employee of the Month. Ms. Williams.
I hope I'm doing this right. Okay. Today, the Board of Education recognizes an employee in our school system who treats her school as if it was her home, which is a natural phenomenon for someone who has spent over 30 years in the same building. Darlene Thomas, custodian at Mayo Elementary School, does impeccable work on a daily basis as a member of the staff at her school. She takes great pride in keeping the upper wing clean and ready for the students and staff each and every day. She always receives compliments about her sparkling floors and shiny sinks. It has been said that Darlene could buff floors before she could walk. The teachers adore her. Mrs. Darlene Thomas is a genuine team player. She helps her colleagues when one of them has to be out. Each year, she works closely with the testing coordinator, making sure all classrooms are properly prepared for state testing. Rarely missing a day of work, she is always happy and cheerful and is an all-around wonderful person. Mrs. Thompson is professional and kind. She will go above and beyond the call of duty for anyone in need. She is extremely respectful and just can't seem to do enough for the teachers and staff at Mayo. Although she has been in her position for many, many years, she approaches each day and week with the same eagerness and determination to complete the job, and it is always done well. Mrs. Thomas has worked at Mayo Elementary since the beginning of her career. She is a true icon in the community and has seen many generations of families educated at that school. She has a welcoming demeanor with students, staff, and the Mayo community members. Over the years, she has had a remarkable impact on the school and community. She willingly works with outside groups who use the school facility, ensuring every evening and weekend functions go smoothly for all involved. She is proud to say that she is walking in her mother's footsteps, who also worked at Mayo Elementary. Darlene is a model employee. Her supervisor told us that she inspects the building on a regular basis, and when she gets to the area for which Darlene is responsible, she has a difficult time finding anything wrong. Everything sparkles as if it was spit shine. When Darlene is given a task, her supervisor can rest assured that it will be done correctly the first time. Darlene Thomas, we all know that first impressions count, and you do an amazing job at keeping those first impressions good impressions at Mayo Elementary School. Thank you for all you do, and the Board of Education wishes you another successful year at your school. Congratulations on being selected for the Employee of the Month for September 2016. Please come join me up front.
My boss, my principal, Mrs. Fitzgerald, the secretary, Mrs. Bennett, and my also chief, Mrs. Moss, and my family. Well, y'all stand up. granddaughter.
How did they get you here?
They told me it was from the meeting that we had during the summer from the school, that they had a big town meeting at the school, so we were supposed to come here. I kept wondering why we had to come here for this, but this is truly an honor. It's truly an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 2.08 is Volunteer of the Month. Mrs. Nally.
Every school needs at least one volunteer who arrives with a smile, helps willingly, uses her talents to accomplish what's needed, and exercises warm leadership to inspire others to volunteer. According to South Shore Elementary Principal Stacy Shaffron, Brenda Lasher is that person for whom the saying, "She goes above and beyond," was written. Today, the Board of Education is proud to honor South Shore's outstanding volunteer, Mrs. Brenda Lasher, as September's Volunteer of the Month. Principal Shaffron sees Mrs. Lasher's organization and leadership skills as key to her accomplishments for the school. When teams of volunteers are needed, Mrs. Lasher makes it happen. If it's a project Mrs. Lasher can see through independently, she does, and it's done well. In addition to being involved in all PTA events, Ms. Lasher's contributions to South Shore over the past 3 years are many and varied. I'll share a few. Last school year, South Shore received an enormous leveled reading library of paperback books for every grade and for the Media Center. To reduce inevitable wear and tear, Mrs. Lasher took home and covered every grade set of books, as well as all of the Media Center's paperback books. The Veterans Day observation at South Shore is always special, with loads of decorations, a school-wide assembly, and a corps of veterans and active military classroom speakers. Last year, Mrs. Lasher single-handedly designed and constructed a beautiful banner on which she attached 300 stars, each signed by a South Shore student. Winter Around the World was South Shore's 2015 winter concert theme. Every student engaged in 6 theme-related hands-on holiday activities. Mrs. Lasher and other volunteers worked diligently with school staff to collect and organize the massive materials needed for all 300 students to complete and take home all 6 activities. Finally, last spring, a giant 25 by 35-foot National Geographic map of Africa was loaned to South Shore for 2 weeks. Each student in this IB-PYP French language school participated in unique hands and feet-on experiences to learn about the 19 French-speaking countries of the African continent. It couldn't have happened without Mrs. Lasher's daily assistance. Mrs. Lasher, thank you for devoting these years of exemplary volunteer work to benefit the students, staff, and families of South Shore Elementary School. We hope you can continue to contribute your time and talents in this new school year. Would you please come forward? With great appreciation, I want to present this Volunteer of the Month certificate and bell to you.
Congratulations. I'm so proud and thank you so much. Now, how did they get you here? What lie did they tell you?
They told us we have to send 3 parent reps to the meeting.
You were the lucky one.
Yeah, I won't believe that next time.
Well, I want to thank you. And who is here? I see a lot of folks.
Oh, hello, everyone. Our wonderful principal, Stacy Shaffron. Sorry, Stacy, you're important, but so are Ms. Keggins and Ms. Akers, who are front office staff to make everything run smooth. Ms. Downs, our beautiful reading specialist, thank you, and our PTA president and my friend Brandy.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for all you do. I'd like to present this.
Oh, thank you.
And that to you.
Thanks.
We'll see you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
The next part of the agenda is 2.09, School and Community Highlights. have any. I know we have back to school highlights. Mrs. Hummer.
So the first 2 weeks of school are always so much fun, and many of us had the opportunity to go visit schools. I went to 29 schools with Dr. Arlotto, and each one was better than the next. There's nothing more exciting than being part of the excitement of the first weeks of school. A couple of things that stood out. First thing, I'm walking in North Glen Elementary School, and this custodian, Ephraim Jones, is out front tying a child's shoes. I mean, how perfect is that to show the caring of the school and how they welcome those kids on the first day. We went to Pasadena Elementary, and this little boy is walking down the hall, and the principal says, "Hi, how you doing?" And he said, "I'm an independent reader." And I was like, how awesome is that? He was so proud of himself. He couldn't wait to tell her that he had, made it to independent reader. So there were just moments like that at every school we went to, and so it was exciting. We saw such great activities in every class and wonderful interactive reading and collaborative projects, and it's going to be a fabulous year. It was great.
Mrs. Nally.
Well, I didn't visit 29 schools, but over the last 10 years, I've visited a lot. Yes. But I did visit a number of schools. And what was, in addition to all the wonderful, wonderful things the students were doing, even on the first days and weeks of school, I want to congratulate and welcome the many new principals and new staff and the new staff members. I saw excitement, enthusiasm, and I just want to welcome them to their administrative positions and tell you that the board supports you and is looking forward to so many great things happening this year. Thank you.
Mrs. Sasso.
Together with Julie and Dr. Arlotto, I visited only 25. I couldn't make it one day. It's really quite a job. But I would like to say, to me, what I was impressed about was really the conditions of the schools. Really, they were kept in perfect condition, and we must give those custodians really an applause because they really worked very hard. It didn't matter if it was a new school or an old school. All of those floors were shining. The walls were as clean could be. And one of the things that was funny is that as we walked along, if there was any paper on the floor, everybody picked it up.
Dr. Arlotto.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It certainly, I'll reiterate what several board members have already said. It's been a very exciting opening to the school year. I've been able to visit over a 7-day period in the first 2 weeks, 30 schools. And let me echo Ms. Sasso, thank you for the recognition of the hard work of operations and facilities. Remembering that there were only, and you heard this at our last board meeting in the update, there were only 37 days from the day that our teachers left to the day the teachers returned. And our facilities team did an amazing job of getting the buildings ready for our students and our staffs. And so I thank you for that. Our teachers are on it. Our principals and assistant principals, food service and custodians, everybody was welcoming and warm as we enter the new school year. It's absolutely an exciting time to be part of Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I also want to remind everybody that last year we were able to recognize both Broadneck High School and our school system. Broadneck High School is recognized by the federal government as not only a state but a national green ribbon school. And we as a school district were recognized as a district with a district sustainability award. Our plaque just arrived, so I thought I'd remind you. So we'll hang this out front. We're very excited. Thank you.
And I'd like to echo too just the great opening of schools, and my favorite was the first day at North County High School where they brought out the band and the flag twirlers and the cheerleaders, and they had a whole pep rally to welcome the 9th graders. So it was just a really nice way to kick off the school year. Before we move on to item 2.10, I'd like to take a moment to address Resolution 5716 that was passed by 4 members of our County Council last night, asking us to adopt a transgender policy which honors what is perceived as the will of the masses. I'd like to clarify for the public that the guidelines that we are currently following are based on these guidelines issued in October 2015 by the Maryland State Department of Education. which is part of Governor Hogan's executive branch. In the education world, guidance from the state and federal government is expected to be followed much like a policy. If our state's guidelines are unsettling to any of our citizens, I encourage you all to reach out to the Maryland State Department of Education. In the meantime, this board is looking forward to the Supreme Court's decision on this matter later this school year, and we will address the need for a formal policy at that time. Mrs. Burge?
I would like, just for clarification's sake, if our board attorney, Mr. Bennett, could clarify for us what exactly it is that, is he not here?
Are you going to be our board attorney today?
What guidance means in the sense of guidance from a government agency to a lower level government agency, because it's my understanding that it isn't a suggestion.
For the record, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer. I did have the opportunity to discuss this topic of guidance with Mr. Bennett. He apologizes he can't be here at the moment to address your question. However, if you allow me the latitude to convey our discussions earlier regarding the matter. I am, as you probably well know, the recipient of a tremendous amount of guidance from both the federal and the state government. We essentially do, in fact, treat guidance as a directive and take it quite seriously. There are repercussions often if either directly, if guidance or directives from either the state education department or federal agency, either the U.S. Department of Ed or other federal agencies, there can be direct repercussions in terms of sanctions or financial impositions. Those are direct that a state or federal agency can impose on you. The other way that it could be impacted is that we could be challenged. An entity or an individual could take us to task in a court setting, in a legal environment, and that could result in a finding or a sanction or a financial penalty as well. So essentially it's called a standard of care. So a regulatory body creates the framework for a standard of care that a public agency is expected to employ towards those within the responsible charge. Be it a facility, the one, for example, that I'm often affiliated with, or our financial resources. There's a standard of care. Well, that same standard of care applies to the students, the employees, our public as well. So again, it is an expectation. It's coming from an authorized entity, either a state agency or a federal agency, and to the best of our abilities, unless further clarified or unless further refined through court cases, etc., we nobly try to adhere to those directives.
So then, just to clarify again, guidelines or guidance aren't a sample policy. It's not just a, oh, if you feel like doing a policy on this, you might want to look at one like this. It's more, this is how you need to do things.
Again, generally they're rather directive in nature. I mean, certainly each locality has to take that and adapt that, to within their organization, the leadership of an organization. The superintendent typically in a school system is the one that translates the directive into how, in terms of a daily operational setting, we are going to deploy this, manage it, monitor it, etc. But a federal government or state government will not craft a policy or regulation. They will leave that to the administrative unit of in our example, an LEA, Local Education Authority, to translate their directives and guidance into how we're going to manage that on a daily basis here locally.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Item 2.10 is the CAC report.
Good morning to the board and to everybody here. I just wanted to take a few minutes at the beginning of this academic year to introduce myself and the new CAC committee. I'm Melanie Teichert. I'll be the chair for this year. And with me is Kelly Purnell. who is our new vice chair, and we're very excited for a new year. We haven't started our meetings for the year yet. We'll begin on Monday. We'll meet the second Monday of every month, 7 to 9 p.m. here in the boardroom. This coming Monday will be our first meeting, and we'll have an orientation for new members from 6 to 7. That was started last year, and I thought was enormously helpful to get the new members up and going. We're very excited for the new year. We have a full slate representing all the high school clusters and other community organizations such as PTA, CCAC, PIAC, also have seats with our committee. We have 17 returning members, 13 new, so a nice mix of people that have been working with us and then new ideas that will be coming in. As you know, last year's CAC worked on several issues of importance, and we submitted those reports to you in June, and those included equity, communication, testing, grading, curriculum items, and school expenses. At our first meeting, we'll get together, grab our new members, and talk about progress that we made last year and what we think our agenda should be for this year. So I expect in our October briefing I'll be able to tell you more about what our focus will be for the upcoming year. I just want to close today to thank all of the board members and the staff for having such an open dialogue with the community. We're part of a military family, and we've lived in many school districts all over the country, and I've never experienced such access to the people making decisions. I look around both at the board with Dr. Arlotto, a lot of the staff I recognize, I've had individual conversations of issues of importance with, and I think the CAC and all of the other community organizations, the PIAC and all these great organizations that some of which you'll hear from today, just are really great at establishing a dialogue of cooperation for this great school system. So, and as a military family, we've chosen to live here 4 separate times. So we love Anne Arundel County. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Item 2.11 is the PTA report.
Good morning, President Korblack, Vice President Hummer, members of the board, and Dr. Arlotto. For the record, my name is Allison Pickard, and I'm the president of Anne Arundel County Council of PTAs. I am pleased to deliver this first report of the school year on behalf of the Council of PTAs. The County Council of PTAs consists of 89 local units. There are more than 12,000 individual PTA members within those school units. The Council of PTAs is structured just like local units, with both elected officers and appointed committee chairs. Our mission is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all our children. Pretty awesome. Our council executive board positions are filled by the following volunteers. Myself as president, Estefania Haller is our first vice president, Ray Leone is vice president of legislation, Chris Leik is our treasurer, Vanessa Rivera is our secretary. Our committees are as follows: Founders Day, Reflections, both chaired currently, but we're still filling vacancies for our Bylaws and Standards Committee, Health and Wellness, and Parent Outreach. The council also seats representatives from other stakeholder groups, such as the superintendent's representative, Teresa Tudor, Diversity Outreach, Laura Gardner, TAC, held by Pam Bukowski, and the CAC is represented by Lisa Shore, and a student representative, which is currently vacant. The council is eager to fill vacant volunteer committee and stakeholder positions. We are actively working to bring depth of leadership to the council by encouraging participants on all committees, especially those I just named. If anyone is interested in getting involved, those listening out in the audience, I would be gladly to work with anybody to find the best fit. As each county in Maryland is unique, so are each of our schools with AACPS, and therefore their PTAs. It has been eye-opening for me as I reach out just how varied our school communities are and the parent engagement successes and challenges facing them. As we build out the council, we are working to ensure that there are representatives from every cluster in leadership roles on the council. The leadership transition that took place this summer for the council sparked much discussion about our goals for this coming school year. The council is determined to enhance communication, boost training opportunities, and increase advocacy efforts within our membership. Communication is a key cornerstone to all we do. The council is working currently to update and modernize our website with the intention of improving not only its look, but its functionality to better support our local units. We have also proactively communicated this summer with all 89 local units in regard to their compliance issues within Maryland PTA and are deploying council leadership and veteran PTA members out to work with units individually. So far this summer, council leadership volunteers, including myself, have directly supported nearly 30 units with a variety of issues. The council serves as a training resource for all PTA members. Our first big training is coming up Saturday, October 1st from 8:30 to 1. Inside this window of time, PTA members will enjoy a networking breakfast to share best practices with each other, hear from an inspirational keynote speaker. Mr. Oscar Alvarenga, the Montgomery County PTA President of the Year, will be sharing his thoughts on diversity and inclusion within PTA. We are also providing new officer trainings for both presidents and treasurers alike. But we also want to encourage regular PTA members to attend this training, to learn about some hot topics affecting students and families, such as hazards of social media. And last but definitely not least, we are providing Advocacy 101 training for all PTA members on October 1st, which brings me to our third goal. Building upon the amazing parental advocacy efforts from last year's budget cycle, the Council will focus this year to encourage more parents and community members to engage in advocacy efforts for our public schools. This October 1st training is just the beginning, and the Council is excited to launch a series of events starting in January centered around advocacy at all levels. The Board of Ed, the County Council, and state delegation, so stay tuned. To round out this report, I must thank Teresa Tudor, Ray Leone, and the Executive Board of the Council for their endless support this summer during this leadership transition. I'm honored to serve alongside each of them, and I'm looking forward to working together towards our mission. Every child, one voice. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Item 2.12 is the CRASC report.
Good morning, President Korbelak, Dr. Arlettos, and member of the board. My name is Scott Howarth. I am a senior at Arundel High School, and I am the president of the Chesapeake Regional Association of Student Councils. As this is the first official CRASC report of the 2016-2017 school year, I want to say welcome back, and I hope everyone had a great summer. Student leadership activities kept on rolling this summer. In its second year, the Insight Student Leadership Intensive was a hit. Student leaders gathered for a series of 6 retreats where we sharpened skills and discussed emerging issues in preparation for the school year. Popular topics included school board composition, student representation, public safety, restorative justice, event planning, and equity. Since school has been back, we have reconvened our regular meeting schedule this year. This year, CRASC meetings will be here at the Carol Parham Building at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesdays, except for when there's an evening board meeting. For regular updates, follow us on Twitter at CRASC_online. While I have the podium, I'd like to take a moment to address a more important topic. On a cool autumn evening in 2013, CRASC students started a conversation about transgender kids' privacy, protection, tolerance, acceptance, and understanding. Over a period of several months, we did research and consulted with experts. We exchanged ideas with students, staff, and community members, and we drafted an amendment to our guiding documents. We chose our words carefully to honor the intentions of the masses, while supporting the underrepresented. We did this with a very clear picture of the consequences and controversy. We considered sports, locker rooms, overnights, uniforms, dress codes, individual beliefs, and the inevitable adverse reactions of those who disagree. We were not reiterating the words of an influential adult or jumping on a popular bandwagon. We knew what we were getting ourselves into, and we decided as the CRASC family that we should initiate a larger conversation with our peers because it felt like a thing that needed to happen. You see, the great thing about being young is that you're still highly committed to integrity. Young people are not concerned about giving in to fear and hate or offending the senses of the uninformed. There is a real freedom and empowerment that comes with being able to take a stand in the name of what is right. Which is why, after months of discussion, on December 17, 2013, the students of Anne Arundel County unanimously passed Article 5, Section 5.01e of the CRASC platform. It reads, CRASC supports a safe, inclusive, informative, unbiased educational experience for all students across the entire spectrum of gender identity and sexual preference. That's right. Not a single objection from the Student General Assembly. Since 2013, we have continued to learn more and engage in the conversation over this important issue. Students have been included and very well represented at every stage. So at this time, as the president of our student body, I'd like to clarify a few things about the student position to the board and to the public. We are offended that anyone could ever think that contents of a child's underoos constitutes a situation of concern or an appropriate topic of political discussions. We cannot imagine a scenario where anyone, parents, students, or non-essential staff, should be informed about the private body parts of a minor. Seriously, it's sick. We do support the idea that vigilance is needed to protect the privacy, modesty, and safety of all students. However, we suggest that anyone who thinks this is about protecting girls from predators should conduct some research about violence against the transgender people. Nationwide, 78% of gender nonconforming youth report significant abuse at school. 31% of the youth noted the abuse was from teachers. And there is zero statistical evidence suggesting that a transgender student is going to attack you in the ladies' room. Officially, CRAFT supports and deeply appreciates the development and implementation of the transgender guidelines. We applaud school systems' bravery in the face of controversy and willingness to do the right thing, even if a noisy minority insists that it's not the popular thing to do. We encourage the community to continue asking questions and engaging in these courageous conversations as that we can all grow together. Growth is painful, but not as painful as being a child with incongruent anatomy, and certainly not as painful as being victimized because an adult who you trusted told the parents of your whole class how you were secretly different so they can avoid you. We commend the hard work of the many people who collaborated on this project and thank them for including students in this discussion. Thanks to everyone who fearlessly does good work in the name of what is right, and thanks to those who have reminded us that all means all, and thank you for the opportunity to represent the students of Anne Arundel County.
Thank you, Scott. I think it's very important to emphasize that you all did this back in 2013. You were 2 years out in front of even our state.
Thank you.
At this time, we're going to take a break so we can take some pictures with the Educator, Employee, and Volunteer of the Month, and we'll be back for public comment. move on to the public comment portion of the meeting. Anyone wishing to speak on an item not on today's agenda may offer testimony during this public comment portion of the meeting. Speakers will be allotted 3 minutes each, and the board asks that comments remain civil and appropriate for the various audiences that may be watching or viewing the meeting. Student-specific and personnel matters are confidential and cannot be discussed in this forum. This time is intended for speakers to voice their opinion and not necessarily as a question and answer period. Speakers may pose questions, but answers will be counted toward the 3-minute allotment. For the record, please give your name before speaking, and handouts should be given to the board assistant. I actually don't have any completed cards for this portion of the meeting. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the board at this time? Okay. We will move on to action items. Item 4.01 is administrative personnel appointments, and we actually don't have any at this time. Item 4.02, personnel. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend that the board approve the actions as stipulated on the attached sheets.
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes 7-0-0. The next 5 items are third readings on policies. The first is item 4.03, policy JJB, interscholastic athletics. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of policy JJB, subject to final correction for style and format.
So moved.
Is there any board discussion? Is there any public comment? All right, all those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. Item 4.04, policy JJ, extracurricular programs. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of policy JJ, subject to final correction for style and format.
So moved.
Is there any board discussion? Any public comment? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. The third policy on our list is item 4.05JGA, student parking at high schools. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of policy JGA, subject to final correction for style and format.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0-0. Item 4.06 is policy IF, curriculum guides and course outlines. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of policy IF, subject to final correction for style and format.
So moved.
Is there any public comment on this item? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. Item 4.07, policy IFE, advanced learner programs K-5. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of policy IFE, subject to final correction for style and format.
So moved.
Is there any public comment on this item? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. Thanks for coming up.
There must have been some great policies.
That's right.
Great job.
We have some other items in the agenda. 4.08 is the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2018 capital budget 6-year plan and state capital improvement plan. This is an information item, and we have a presentation.
Indeed.
Good morning. For the record, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer, Anne Arundel County Public Schools.
Lisa Seaman Crawford, Director of Facilities.
And we are here to present item 4.08, which is an information item only this morning regarding the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2008 capital budget, 6-year plan, and state capital improvement plan. We are required to remit this plan to the state annually. The date for this year is October 5th of 2016. The Board of Education will hold a workshop to better inform the board regarding the specifics and the details of the contents of this exhibit, as well as allow the Board of Education to pose any questions that they may wish for clarification. That meeting will be held at 6 p.m. here in this room on September the 13th. While the public is welcome to attend the workshop on the capital budget, no public testimony will be taken at that time. However, the board will hold a public hearing relating to the capital budget at its as part of its next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be September 21st. And naturally, the public is both invited to attend as well as participate and testify on the item the evening of the 21st. So today, we simply want to orientate you to the exhibit in front of you. Again, given that there will be ample opportunities to go through it in significant detail when we convene for the workshop. The first page itemizes in a priority order the superintendent's recommendation for the capital budget, and you'll see it's totaling approximately $235 million at the bottom line. The second page of the exhibit, and again, we'll go through all of these in much greater detail, shows a disaggregation of the superintendent's recommendation between county funding and state funding. So of the total that we mentioned earlier, we would be requesting approximately $65.4 million of it from the state, with the remaining $169.2 million coming from the local county government. The third page of your exhibit is, in fact, the 6-year capital improvement plan, showing not just the 18 recommendation of the superintendent, but the recommendations for the out years as required by state law. And finally, the fourth page of the exhibit disaggregates the state's sub-share of that 6-year plan so that we can adequately telegraph to the state of Maryland, just like to the county government, what we are asking them to prepare for and budget for in the out years. That concludes our presentation from this morning. We'll certainly take any questions that you have, again with the caveat that there will be extensive details and information provided during the evening of the workshop.
Mrs. Birch.
I think this is a basic question. Looking at the 6-year plan, when I see money for all the different old mill projects, I can't remember. There's so much. I can't remember everything. I wish I could. Did we already ask for money for property purchase for the old mill project? Did we already get that?
So in the board adopted capital improvement plan that was approved and remitted to the county government this past year, there was an official request. It was in the out year, so it was not part of our FY17 budget. In working collectively with the county executive's office and the county council, they arrived at the decision that they wanted to put money aside within the county's budget in lieu of in ours for the acquisition of property should it be deemed necessary, essentially, to discharge the project. We're going to see a presentation on the Old Mill Complex study here shortly, later this morning, hopefully. But yeah, so there is money set aside. It is not in the Board of Education's budget. It is in the county government's budget should the necessity arise.
Okay, thank you for reminding me about that. I just, having looked at the Old Mill study and knowing that some of the possibilities included property purchase and not seeing property purchase here, I needed to be reminded as to how that would happen if it were to happen. Thank you.
Mrs. Nally.
I'm just have a question about open space classroom enclosures. When I came on the board in 2007, I was really hopeful, but that by 2017, I would be leaving with no open space classrooms in the county. Apparently, that's not so. 2018, I noticed money, and 2019. Does that mean that all open space classroom enclosures? Now, I understand that there are some where when the school is in the MGT study, you're not going to go in and when the school's deemed to be replaced or whatever, you're not going to go in and put open space, do something about it because it's in that timeline. But the others that are not, or can I be assuming then, other than those schools that are in the timeline for renovation or replacement, that by 2019, all open space classroom enclosures will be complete.
Well, that's correct. So we're going to be the
If
superintendent's
funded.
right. The superintendent's recommendation is asking for funding in FY18 for both Shadyside and Brockbridge elementary schools. That will complete all of the elementary schools in the county, save for those few that are in the more comprehensive CIP. And then in FY 2019, we'll be asking for funding for the last remaining secondary school, which will be Chesapeake Bay Middle School. And then we're essentially out of the open space business here in Anne Arundel County.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It's time for the fad to come back, right?
No, ma'am.
I don't have any other questions from the board, or is there any public comment at this time? Okay, we'll see you next week. Item 4.09 is the Joseph Turner Park Agreement. This is an information to action item. Do I have a motion to move this from information to action? Second. All those in favor? We now have an action item. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of the Joseph Turner Park Agreement.
Mrs. Hummer.
So it's my understanding of this, correct, that this is a park that we have owned for years, that Annapolis has been maintaining and using as a park, and that the city is taking steps that that they would eventually own this property. Is that correct?
So it's a multi-step process. You're right. I'm sorry, again, Alex Shackno, Chief Operating Officer. So since approximately 1961, while the Board of Education has owned this land, the city has day-to-day management oversight, has been improving the property. They have applied for and won a grant from the State Department of Natural Resources, but because they are not the property owners, the State Department of Natural Resources requires concurrence from the school district, the owner of the property, as well as county government, so that they can disperse the grant. So that is the purpose of the action item before you today, is simply to free up that grant money so that the city can, in fact, procure and install playground equipment. That's the short game. The long game is that we would be accessing this property. We, in fact, back in 2011, this board took action to access the property to the county government, and with the intention that the county government would then convey it to the city. That deal was never, in spite of this board voting in favor of that and not having anything to do with us, that deal never transpired. But we've had conversations with both the county administration as well as the city administration. Both are new to their seats. We're not a part of the 2011 discussion, and they have expressed an interest to do exactly that. So I anticipate in relatively short order we would be bringing another decision item before this board with a recommendation that we consider once again declaring the property surplus, go through the state education article procedures to convey it by operation of deed to the county government, and then the county government would hold title to the land. They could do with it with whatever they please. More than likely they would then have county council approval to convey it over to the city government, and we would no longer own this little postage stamp parcel. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any public comment on this item? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. Item 4.10 is the Arnold Elementary School right-of-way dedication, easements, and land exchange. This is also an information to action item. Do I have a motion to move this from information to action?
Second.
All those in favor? We now have an action item. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of the Arnold Elementary School right-of-way dedication, easements, and land exchange.
Is there any board questions or comments on this item? Is there any public comment on this item? Mrs. Birch.
I just want to ask if the community in the area is aware of all the things that are happening with this. I mean, is it affecting current homeowners?
So short and long range plans, again, Alex Scheckner, Chief Operating Officer. So there's a lot of activity in the area.
Right.
Our project is a school renovation project, and you recall we run a very community-based process for that. There's a lot of development in the area, and the developers are obligated to hold public outreach events. They hold public hearings, so clearly the community knows through the planning and zoning process what is occurring there. The county government has a multi-year plan as well to improve the road access and the drainage, et cetera. So the county government would be creating those outreach. This is really, it's rare that something this small actually excites me. And let me explain that. So this is truly a public-private partnership. We talk about it all the time. But we've got three entities. You've got a Board of Education, and you have a county government, and you have private developers that essentially came together to say, how could we best, in a long-range vision, how can we best utilize our three assets so that at the end it's truly a win-win-win, win for the school district, win for the county government, and win for the developers. And this really embodies that. So there's been a tremendous amount of conversation. I know with us today is Elm Street, but there's other developers in that area have been working collaboratively with the county government as well to make sure that all of those roadway improvements, the right-of-ways, the stormwater management is well coordinated from start to finish as a project in its totality. We're a very small piece of that. I don't know if the gentlemen want to introduce themselves and elaborate on that any further.
Sure. I'm Mike Berlbaugh, Vice President with Elm Street Development. Yeah, just to echo that, as far as our piece of it, we have held public meetings to discuss our development as well as the aspects of the upgrades to Joyce Lane. What's not seen here is we're actually part of a 3-developer team that is going to be upgrading a large portion of Joyce Lane from the entrance where it meets the school all the way down to Hardy Road with a design to complete it all the way out to Ritchie Highway. As you know, Joyce Lane has been a substandard road for a while. So all of this ties together the stormwater management, which the easement which goes over to the county, which then manages the stormwater off of the newly improved road. So that, yeah, there's a lot of pieces here that benefit the county. The land swap will enable the full-size athletic fields for the elementary school, and then you know, our piece with the entrance off of Joyce Lane. So it all fits together.
And the greater public as well, Ms. Burge, in that the initial concept plan for the development would have had created yet another entrance onto Route 2. It's a very heavily trafficked and unfortunately a higher speed road. So the residents of the development now will be able to not have to compete for direct access to Route 2. They will come out onto Joyce Lane, and Joyce Lane, you know, at one end has a signalized intersection, so the residents will have a much safer and more controlled way in and out to the place of residence again, and protect the higher volume, higher speed traffic on Route 2 from having yet another connection point. So there's actually even a bigger win for the public at large to this.
I just really wanted to make sure that we were being good neighbors to the folks who are currently there, that we were communicating with everyone that all that was going on. So thank you.
And I'm excited that we're going to get another ball field, which I assume we could share with Parks and Rec.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. Thank you. Item 4.11 is an information to action item, school start and dismissal times 2017-18. And I want to say, and I should have said this way at the beginning, two of our members were not able to be here today because of work commitments. And what I would like to do is make a motion to move this from information to action to information only, since we don't have everyone here to take a vote. So that's my motion. Information to action to information. All those in favor? Okay, we now have an information item. And Dr. Arlato, your recommendations on here, but would you like to just reiterate what the two options are so we can have a discussion?
Yes, ma'am, I'll be glad to. Just to refresh the board's memory and those here in the room and otherwise paying attention Back in April, at the board's request, staff brought forward three options that were four options, but two of those options in terms of changing start times for the 17-18 school year as directed by the Board of Education were within the confines and produced based on the number of based on the amount of money we had that had been allocated the previous year by the county council, roughly $602,000. There was a third option that was based on the judgment of the board at the time to shift monies and ask for an additional $1.4 million in the budget request that we sent to the county executive and the county council, and a option for what we could do in terms of changing start times, having the right equipment and drivers available, using that money in addition to the $602,000. It was basically a $2 million proposal. At that time, let me also remind that through the budget process last year, I and staff presented a budget that included a little over $8 million and a more comprehensive shift in school start times. It was ultimately the decision of this board to not move forward on that, to shift monies around as I just said, and to request $1.4 million instead of the $8 million, and possibly move forward with some of those possibilities. What you have before you are the two options that were presented that leave us based on the monies that we have available from the county council from 2 years ago that we've been holding for this very shift. And it is my understanding that the board intends into the future to vote and make a final decision on shifting start times for the 17-18 school year. That will give us, we encourage the board to do that as expeditiously as possible in the next couple of weeks or month, so that we can begin to inform the public, create a communication plan, make sure the buses have been ordered, the routes have been drawn, and we're ready to go for the 17-18 school year. So what you have before you is option one, where there is a shift as you see, there's a shift in the high schools of 13 minutes from the current 7:17 time to a beginning of 7:30, and shifts in all of our other schools. Those are the middle and elementary, as well as some of our alternative special centers, of a 15-minute shift, and you can see the number of buses and the cost for that. What I will point to is on the far right of that chart, you'll see in red what that is depicting are the number of schools and that would end after 4 o'clock based on a shift on the front end. If you shift the front end of a start time, you have to shift the back end of a start time to maintain the same number of minutes in a day for the high school, middle school, elementary, or the special school. What you see there in the red, again, I'll point out, there would be 8 schools, 4 middle, 2 elementary, and 2 of our alternative schools, other schools, that would be ending after 4 o'clock. That was a point of great discussion with this board, and that's the reason it's included in this chart, and I make note of it again for this board that schools ending after 4 o'clock was of concern. Option 2, that was also presented last spring, same options, show that this is where we move the starting of the high school start times from 7:17 to 7:35, a shift of 18 minutes, and a total of 20 minutes for each of the middle schools, elementary schools, and our special and alternative schools. Again, we can do this with the same amount of money and the same buses needed, through a lot of hard work by our transportation department. Again, let me point out to the far right of the chart, in red, you'll see that the number of schools, of course, if you shift further on the front end, you have to shift further on the back end. And we now would have 4 middle schools, 7 elementary, and 2 other schools that would end after 4 o'clock. Again, I reiterate, I point that out because that was a long topic of conversation with members of the board at the time about schools ending after 4 o'clock. We have staff here, and I'm certainly glad to answer questions as the discussion moves.
Mrs. Hummer.
For option 1, what are the 2 elementary schools that would be impacted to start after 4 p.m. and how late after 4 p.m. are we looking at?
So for option 1, the 2 elementary schools are at Hebron Harbin Elementary which their new closing time would be 4:10. They're currently have a closing of 3:55, and they would shift to 4:10. And Mead Heights Elementary School is the second. They currently have a closing time of 3:50, and they would be 4:05.
Okay. Dr. Frank.
First of all, I want to applaud our superintendent, Dr. Alato, for bringing this subject matter to the public, because it's not going to be an easy subject, and people are going to feel one way or another about it. I hope that we get more folks involved in making this decision. One of the things I'd like to point out to the public is that just by chance, as a reader of the Wall Street Journal, there's a story recently from this national newspaper about school start times in Anne Arundel County. So I hope you'll all have an opportunity to read that and think about that. And I'd like you to make some consideration about, if we're going to do this, on what basis are we going to do this? Are we going to do this on the basis of money? Are we going to do this at convenience to parents? Are we going to do this on the convenience or what is best for education? So at this point, I'm ambivalent, but I hope we have a large number of folks that will show up and let us make a decision. Thank you.
If I could take a moment, thank you, Dr. Frank. If I could remind you, Dr. Frank, and other members of the board, as well as the public, that after our budget release last December, staff took it upon themselves, and we had 3 very, very public meetings.
Yes,
where we invited the public. You were there in attendance at Old Mill. I remember you there in the audience and asking questions. I appreciate you being there. Many of you, the board members, were there as well at the various meetings. They were very well advertised. They were well attended, and they were very public meetings where we presented a more comprehensive option that I had built into the budget, that the staff had built into the budget. I'll also know that then those folks that were there at those meetings, I'll remind you, were broken into small groups. Very meticulous notes were taken and compiled based on the public's feeling about that option or other options. They had a chance to discuss that. And then there was a very public survey that went out, and we had a high return rate on that survey, and it was very clear that the general public was not ready for a comprehensive shift in start times at this time. And therefore, it was then the board's, based on that information, Dr. Frank, it was this board's decision, based on all of that public input and public information, to go a different route than the comprehensive plan that had been moved forward. And that's what brings us to here today.
Dr. Alato, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate them. And as you know, unfortunately, you've gone out of your way to take the public's thoughts into consideration. We've been talking about this for a while, and I think we need to make a decision about this, as difficult as it's going to be.
Mrs. Nally.
Now, on this option, Hebron Harmon and Mead Heights, what time will those schools begin? I know I see Hebron Harmon ending at 4:10. Mead Heights, when do they begin? Did I miss that?
Alex may have that start time. I had the end time in mind, so I apologize. I didn't have that in front of me.
I know Alex has that right in his mind.
Good morning, Alex Shackno, Chief Operating Officer. While not in my mind, I've got it on a piece of paper right in front of me.
Oh, okay.
So according the official start times, this is for the current academic year, the 2016-2017 year. At present, Hebron Harmon Elementary School begins at 9:30. So you will be adding either 15 minutes to 9:30 or 20 minutes to 9:30, depending on option 1 or option 2. Mead Heights Elementary School currently begins at 9:25. And again, so with 9:25, they'll either be moving to 9:40 or 9:45 as a start time, just by way of example.
Now, what about the other options? There's 7 elementary schools in the other options.
Yes,
what
ma'am.
are those 7?
Those those 7 elementary schools for option 2, which would have a post 4 o'clock ending, Miss Nally, are Bodkin Elementary School. Would you like times, Mrs.?
I'd like beginning. I can
I'm sorry,
see.
they're in front of you. I'm sorry, I didn't know they were
Yeah.
up on screen.
I can
So
see.
they're up there on the screen in front of you.
Right. But beginning times for those schools.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll be glad to read those into the record as well, and I'll go in the order that's depicted there. So at the present time, Bodkin Elementary School begins at 9:20 a.m. Folger McKenzie opens at 9:20 at the present time. As I previously indicated, Hebron Harmon currently begins at 9:30. Mead Heights currently begins at 9:25. Odenton Elementary School currently begins at 9:20. Overlook also currently begins at 9:20. And finally, Solly Elementary School currently begins at 9:20 as well. So under option 1, you would be adding 15 minutes to those start times. Under option 2, you would be adding 20 minutes to those start times that I just enumerated.
I have concerns, but
Mrs. Birch.
I guess a couple things. One, my question is, I guess when we had originally asked for this to come back to us in the fall with new ideas, we had anticipated getting a $2 million option because we had hoped for $2 million. Is that right?
You had hoped for you would ask for 1.4 million, so you adjusted the budget in February to reflect a reduction in 8.1
Right.
with an addition of 1.4. You put the 1.4 together with the 6 and you've got $2 million.
So we had hoped to not just get these two back. Right. I mean, that was what we had anticipated when we said, come back to us in September with some, I mean.
No, it was anticipated that you would see just these.
When we directed him to bring this back, we knew that it was only going to be 600,000.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Right, there were.
Okay.
Yeah, it was after the budget had come back.
Okay, but the first time we had thought that we were going to see some.
Sure.
Okay. All right. And I guess I know that Hebron and Harmon and Mead Heights are probably on four runs. Those schools are on 4 runs, right? Are any of those other schools on 4 runs, or are they three run buses?
It's a combination. 4 runs is the norm. In order to get the maximum utilization of a bus, we try to get 4 tiers. That sometimes is not possible, depending on geography or traffic. So our goal is typically to aim for 4.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Mrs. Hummer.
Do Hebron, Harmon, and Mead Heights both have before and after care on site? Do we know?
I don't know, but we can find out.
Okay, I'm just
I've got
curious.
the answer over there.
But if they have it on site, and are they schools that have a waiting list for before and after care?
We can certainly find that out.
To find that out. For Mary Moss, when we talk about the 10 additional buses that are needed, those were special education buses, correct? Does Mary Moss fall under the special education buses?
No, ma'am.
They're on a regular route?
Yes.
Okay, so they're with one of our contractors, not our private.
So when we're talking about those buses, we're talking more such as the Maryland School for the Blind or the Hannah More programs up in Baltimore, or so essentially out-of-county non-public placement buses.
So Marley Glen Special and Mary Moss wouldn't be considered special education buses?
Right. They're currently serviced, those schools in particular are currently serviced by Anne Arundel County owned and operated buses.
When we pick up children for Mary Moss for buses, do they have a consolidated bus stop, or are they picked up at their homes?
Those youngsters typically get portal-to-portal service, so typically we try to pick them up at or as close to their residence as possible. As you can well imagine, occasionally it's challenging for some of those youngsters to traverse the terrain, so we try to bring the buses, and we work with the parents and with the special educators, because they've all got unique issues that have been identified, for example, within their IEPs, et cetera. So there's some compliance matters But again, that's a much more one-to-one sort of dynamic with the individuals at those schools.
So that would be like a Marley Gun special. Is that also the case with Mary Moss? Because those aren't necessarily the special.
Right. So Mary Moss, for example, the expectation is that they can certainly walk as far as a traditional elementary or middle school student would to a bus.
So they would be set at a regular bus stop for what's to come about. Have we already ordered these 10 new buses?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Mrs. Nally.
So the latest start time, I'm back on this, I'm the elementary school principal, is 9:45. Is that the latest start time for either option? For elementary, I'm looking at.
So the latest, at present, Hebron Harmon is the latest start elementary school, which is 9:30.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. I added
Under option 1, it would move to 9:45. Under option 2, it would move to 9:50.
Okay, so the latest is 9:50.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you may not know this. I had it in my mind that daycare, before school daycare is 2 hours before school opens, or does that vary now?
It actually varies because, for example, they're run by Recreation and Parks, but they're also run by a program, Open Door. There's a couple other entities to provide them. They set their own hours. Quite often, it's a combination of what that community actually needs and what our school needs. So there's conversations between those before and after care operators. Some do run a little bit longer, some run a little bit shorter. It's actually school by school. It's a little bit different.
Okay, thank you.
Do we know how many school buses actually serve Hebron Harmon?
Do we? Yes. Do I at this very second? No.
Okay.
It's back in my office.
Okay. Just curious about those two schools. And I know this might come up from public comment. How's the software analysis going? Do we think we're going to be able to retrieve any efficiencies or obtain some buses back from efficiencies?
So we're certainly continuing
or times.
Sure. So we're currently continuing to stand up that software package. So, for example, last year we had loaded in the county maps. We loaded in the student data population from last year, to stop locations from last year, to start-stop times from last year's, et cetera. We're in a new academic year, so a lot of that information has to be overwritten with the demography of this school year, et cetera. So once we get stabilization, generally, for example, the student body by about September 30, because that's when we have to do our official student counts for the purposes of the state, that the ins and outs and the out-of-area transfers, for example, stabilized by then. So sometime after that point, we'll be able to upload the new student information system and continue to build parallel, once we have the data in, continue to model and build parallel scenarios.
Okay. Mrs. Sasso.
When will the 10 school buses be ordered, and how long will it take for them to get here? Do you have any idea?
They will be not ordered until this Board of Education decides to take a vote in some manner. They're not necessary for me to support the schools I currently have in the current start time configuration. The county government did give us the appropriation authority to order those buses. So if the need arises, and the need will be triggered by a vote, then after that we'll put the specifications out to get the buses bid. An award document will come back before this board to ratify whether in fact they concur with us moving forward with the acquisition, and then the contracts will be signed and the orders will be placed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't have any other board comments. Do we have any public comment? Or Dr. Frank, you have something to say?
Pardon me. Is the software available? Have we had an opportunity to understand how to use it? What kind of time frame? Is that a concern here?
It is not for the decision item before you this morning.
In order to determine this, what we're talking about here, is software not an issue?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we can have public comment.
Hi, my name's Claudia O'Keefe. I'm a parent in the school system. My daughter just started high school this year. She gets up at 5:30 in the morning, bless her heart. She works really hard at it. It's very difficult for her. There's been a lot of talk about the late starting schools. I'd like to talk a little bit about the earlier starting schools. Of course, you know all the high schools start early. All our high school kids are standing at bus stops, the ones that ride buses, before sunrise in the morning. Along our bus routes for at least part of the year in the winter months. They're all of them standing in the dark. The sun doesn't rise in the winter until after 7:17. Our middle schools, there are over 400 buses serving our middle schools. 197 of them start picking up students before 7:30 in the morning, our winter sunrise. The earliest pickup for magnet school is 6:35. The non-magnet earliest pickup, I believe, is 7 o'clock a.m., which means by the end of this month, a lot of our middle school students are going to be standing out in the dark. 36 of our elementary school buses start picking up before 7:30, which means part of the year we have elementary-age children standing in the dark at bus stops around the county. The earliest pickup is 7:10 a.m. October 9, sunrise is at 7:10 a.m. So shifting all school start times by 15 or 20 minutes helps all our students in all our schools. It helps children of all ages. It's healthier for middle school students, it's healthier for high school students, and it's certainly better for little elementary school kids not to be standing out in the dark in the morning. I encourage you to do the best you can for our kids. The reasoning 20 years ago when they shifted to a 7:17 high school start time was that if we could do better, we would. Now we can do better. We can make our schools safer, we can make our schools better, we can improve student performance, we can improve student health, we can reduce disciplinary actions, we can reduce accidents for our young drivers. We ask our students every day to do the best that they can in school. We owe it to them to do the best that we can for them. Thanks you.
Thank you, Claudia.
My name is Deborah Wood. I'm a child development specialist and been watching this high school start time since we first moved to this county 34 years ago. The main issue seems to be money. And money as in opposition to what's best for students. And high school students, as our brain research is clearer and clearer telling us, adolescents do not get sleepy till 11 p.m. They're not ready to rise until 8 a.m. They do best in school when they're awake. And there's physiology to explain that. If anybody wants copies of the Wall Street Journal as part of our very important public education process of making this shift possible, I brought copies here today. And I'm just hoping that when we get to making the proper decision, we find the money. If it's important, it's like polio vaccines. Do you agree with it or not agree with it? It was very inconvenient. I personally don't happen to like sugar in anybody, but that was the way that I got it as a kid. You just do what's best for the most with what resources that you have. And I'm pretty sure our county and our state can find the resources to get more buses and make use of that software to make bus routing more efficient.
Hi, my name is Melissa Ellis. I am a parent of 2 high school students here in Anne Arundel County. They are actually new to the public school system. I homeschool my 2 younger students at this time. My kids, they wanted the high school experience, the American high school experience, and I support them in that. But it's very difficult every day to see the struggle they go through, getting up at 5:30 in the morning, as a parent, knowing that they have alternatives. They could homeschool. And the fact that I see them making this decision daily to impact their health and their well-being is very difficult as a parent. I struggle with the fact that this county keeps these hours despite the recommendations of the American Medical Association, the Center for Disease Control, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychological Association, the National Sleep Foundation, and your task force. Research has shown that besides this being a surefire way to improve academics across the board, it also shows that we can greatly improve the safety of our adolescent students by reducing teen suicide, teen depression, and other stress-induced illnesses, reducing teen auto accidents. Correlation has been shown between obesity and sleep deprivation. The list goes on. The benefits are tremendous. My question would be, I see that we've spent hundreds of thousands on the software. We're talking about potentially another $2 million to make a 13-minute change, or 17, what did we say? 13 or 18. I think the resources need to be found to do what we know needs to be done, rather than spend the money to make this change that's not sufficient. We need to actually make the change that's going to benefit our students. You have the information. You know what our kids need. All of the experts have told the nation that. And now we are in the nation's eye as being one of the worst offenders. So I really, really, really hope that the driving decision here is, or what drives this decision is the well-being of our kids, please. Thanks.
Morning. Heather McIntosh. I'm speaking as a member of Start School Later and a parent and a member of the AACPS School Start Time Task Force from 2014. As we heard, Anne Arundel County has been amongst the first to discuss the issue of school start time change well before the year 2000. So we're going on 2 decades now. And while I recognize that there's been millions, thousands, hundreds of changes in personnel on the school board, you know, we're still moving along as a body. So this conversation, I would urge you to move forward with a very specific goal while you have the opportunity before you. The AACPS School Task Force Committee, quoted in their report in 2014, concluded that extra sleep potentially gained by starting school later would be beneficial for adolescents, particularly high school students. Most critically, the task force members discussed whether the overall positive benefits of later start times outweighed the potential negative effects. They determined that later school start times was worthy of consideration and could be achieved in an acceptable way. AACPS is in the national eye. We've moved the conversation from local to national. Districts around the country have successfully changed their school start times. They've worked through all the different options and they've made the moves. They're seeing the benefits already. AACPS is continuing to ignore the recommendations of the American Medical Association, as you've heard, and specifically that no middle or high school start before 8:30 in the morning for health, safety, and academic achievement. So we really would be achieving all of our goals with one move. This is a potential for significant benefit across all of the different priorities that we all share. I ask you, and I'm glad we're discussing because there is a lot to consider, I ask that you commit to making the most significant move to later high school start time for 2017-18 school year, with an overall stated goal of moving to the larger goal of meeting recommendations of 8:30 a.m. for middle and high school and safe and healthy schedules for all students by 2017-2018. Also, please commit to using the transportation software as soon as possible to run multiple scenarios so that we can really optimize this process and make the most of our investment in this important transportation software. I would also suggest creating an implementation team to include staff and community. We have so many skills here in our community that we could pull in, and a representative of Start School Later to help share the data that we've gathered from around the country. And most importantly, commit to continuing to educate the public about why we are committed to getting to the how of school start time change and work in a manner consistent with best change management practices. I know that we can do this. Let's make a move now that we can make, and let's look at the bigger picture. And I appreciate your hard work and your support of this issue.
Ms. Sasso.
I would like to answer Heather's presentation. Heather, you need to know financially we have made a decision that we are going ahead with late school start. Okay, the board has made a decision. Where do we get the $2 million? As the public, you will have to help us, because remember, we don't have the money. So ask Anne Arundel County, ask the governor, help us in that way. Push it that way. They give us the money. We don't have it. Maybe you can ask for the money to be only for that. Second one is, we have not failed. Maybe in the past it has not been addressed, but this board, from the time I came on in February, we are just moving forward to get it done. Okay, and we will get it done for the 2017-18 like we promised. Okay, the next one is, yes, we are committed. And the reason why we chose not to take the action and the vote today is because there's 2 members absent and it might have failed. Okay, so you need to know that we are also working with you. And the next one, the software, Alex can tell you, and at the meeting, that software is basically being studied, done, and we are pretty much at the end of it as far as the software is concerned. I mean, they really have it going. So in all of your points, you need to know we are working with you, and we are really looking forward to the 17-18 to have option 1 or option 2 in place. Okay? Thank you.
Kevin Harmon's 11 buses, by the way.
I just saw something that I wanted to publicly comment on that I have a concern about. And for the record, Lisa Shore. The kids at Mary Moss, if I understand correctly, they come from all over the county to attend Mary Moss. Their school, according to this, will not be getting out until 4:30. And I'm worried about the effect on those kids of their recreational time, their family time. And I think that's an issue that we need to address. And perhaps take a look at, if we do go to one of these options, some type of phase-in program where we look at maybe purchasing more buses for Mary Moss and Marley Glen, or find out what the cost of that might be, so that those kids can get home across the county at a reasonable hour. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will request that this be put back on the agenda for our next board meeting on the 21st as an action item. The next item on our agenda is 4.12, the FY 2017 Comprehensive Maintenance Plan. This is an information to action item. Do I have a motion to move this from information to action?
So move.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We now have an action item. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend approval of the fiscal year 2017 Comprehensive Maintenance Plan.
Second.
All right, we don't have a presentation. Are there any board questions or comments on this item? Are there any public comments? Mrs. Birch?
I just want to ask a question to help the public, because I know that we've had some issues in the past. We do not have all of these things in the budget. We are not planning to do all of these things. So, LR means long range. That means that we're not actually, it's not in a budget right now. It's not planning to be done. The schools that are in what happens with the schools that are in our 6-year plan? Can you just explain how this document works? Because I know that there have been years when it has been misunderstood what this document is. So I'm just hoping that you can just give a brief overview for everyone as to what it means when it says 2017, $35,000 to replace the stage lift at Shipley's Choice, but for replace locker rooms 75 and 78, 90,000 long range. Thank you.
For the record, Lisa Seaman Crawford, Director of Facilities.
Michael McCafferty, Supervisor of Maintenance.
This is a 5-year plan that we look at work that we hope to do based on funding and condition of the building. We go through, we have list of roofs, we have list of locker rooms, we have bleachers, PA systems, and we use all of the capital budget and some operating budget to fund these. But it is just, as you said, a picture of what we hope to do based on funding, and the long range is items that we have on the list that show the cost of our backlog of work, and it also will not reflect the schools that are in our CIP for full renovations.
Okay, all those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. The next two items are review items. Item 5.01 is the Old Mill Complex Master Plan Study.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. For the record, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer. Let me allow our guest to introduce himself for the record as well.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kieran Wilmus, Principal with Griffin Parker Architects.
And we're here to present item 5.01. It is a review item, as was indicated earlier. So a master planning study was undertaken to review the replacement of schools located on the Old Mill Complex site, as well as some adjacent schools. The schools in particular that were studied were the Old Mill High School, the Old Mill Middle School North, the Old Mill Middle School South, Rippling Woods, Quarterfield Elementary School, and Cat North. The study included evaluations of not just properties and facilities under the purview of the Board of Education, but other lands, for example, in the portfolio of the county government, particularly recreation and parks, and some privately held parcels as well. The study was funded and commissioned by Anne Arundel County government. It was done to support the MGT of America Strategic Facilities Utilization Master Plan. Understanding how large of an undertaking this is, it was imperative for the public at large, as well as the funding authorities, to have an idea of the scope and breadth and ultimate cost and timeline to discharge a public works project that is this large. So we collaborated not just with Grimm and Parker, but with also KCI Technologies and Jacobs Engineering, our professional sector partners, as well as county government, recreation and parks, et cetera, to undertake this broad brush master plan study. And so we'd like to allow Kieran an opportunity to walk us through the exhibit, some of the background and methodology, and then the conclusions and recommendations of this study document.
Great. Okay, I'm going to step up to the lectern. Okay, thanks, Alex. So we're going to walk you through kind of the abbreviated version, I think, that you'll have in front of you and that you'll see up on the screen behind me. If you can bear with me, I'm going to be turning back to highlight some things on the screen. If I can ask you to advance the slide to one more. There we go. So this is kind of the overall roadmap of the existing conditions assessment that started off the process. And just to footnote the methodology that was gone through, as Alex said, we had a diverse group of stakeholders from several different county agencies. Together with that group, we developed a concise list of project objectives, things that we wanted to achieve while we went through this study and looked at various iterations of the design options. If you'll bear with me, I'll delve into those in a little bit more detail when we get to the evaluative criteria that ultimately landed us with a recommendation. That'll be one of the later slides that we share. We kicked off the process with an extensive series of data collection efforts. This involved archival research, site visits by our engineering and consultant team, site surveys, discussions with MAA, all the agencies that were involved and had a stake in these properties. And then ultimately embarked on the design process itself, where we released our team and looked inward to study different design options, multiple options of different ways to utilize these different properties to, again, meet those objectives and goals that we developed at the onset of the process. So just again, to quickly orient you on the sites, I'll do my best to stay near the mic here. North is up on your screen, and the major crossroads here is Interstate I-97 running north and south, intersected by New Cut Road. Starting from the western side, we've got what we call the Quarterfield Cat North site, which currently houses Quarterfield Elementary School and the Cat North Career and Technology building. Next site over is the Papa John's Farm, which is bound by Interstate 97, New Cut Road, and Grover Road. It's about a 48-acre property that's currently undeveloped. The Old Mill property that Alex mentioned is a relatively comprehensive site, 172 total acres. Right now it houses Rippling Woods to the north, the Old Mill High / Middle School South, Middle School North complex in the middle, and then Ruth Parker Eason to the south. Ruth Parker Eason, incidentally, is not part of this study. It's just adjacent to the property, and just wanted to highlight that. You'll also notice that large 170-acre parcel is bisected here where my line is with a BG&E overhead transmission line right away. So you'll see that as a benchmark as we move through that site. The fourth site is the Old Mill Southgate Park site off of Oakwood Drive. Right now it's owned and operated by Anne Arundel County Parks and Recreation and Parks Department, and serves as a community amenity. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. So once we identified the major buildable areas and the opportunities for development on each of those properties, we were also asked to make sure that we keep all the current schools and programs up and running on these sites and not consider swing space off-site. So we had to look carefully at the phasing of these different projects in the sequence as well. So we looked at that, as well as all the buildable areas that were available. As part of our site analysis, we identified all the topographical features, steep slopes, utility right-of-ways, vehicular access points, and the like, and then also influence from BWI Airport, which is within 4 miles of a couple of these sites. So all those factors came into play when we identified the buildable areas again to embark on our study. We looked at several options along the way, had an iterative series of meetings with Alex's team from public schools, county government, Parks and Rec, and the like. We landed on 4 final options that we're going to present quickly to you today. And again, these are the phasing diagrams that show how the phases will unroll, will be in sequence as we go through the different steps. We'll go into a little more detail on option 1, and I'll just point out the differences in the future remaining options. So in option 1 for the master plan, the first phase is to replace Rippling Woods Elementary, again, leaving the existing school up and running and building that to the north part of that Old Mill property. Phase 2 is going to be building the new Old Mill Middle School South, and that will be over on the Southgate Park property. Phase 3 will be building a new high school called Old Mill West, and this is meant to relieve some of the overflow capacity right now at Old Mill High School. So that would phase 3 would be at the Papa John's site, currently undeveloped. Phase 4 would be a new Quarterfield Elementary school, again allowing during construction the existing school to be occupied and maintained. Phase 5 is a new Cat North building, which we built just north of the right-of-way on the Old Mill site. And the notion here was to try to keep that close to one of the high schools and recognizing the synergies between the CTE high school and its adjacent comprehensive high school program. Phase 6 would be the new replacement of the current Old Mill High School on its same property, just adjacent. And then the last phase would be a new Old Mill Middle School North, which would be built on the Cat North property. So the phasing of these new schools will allow for the demolition of the existing schools, which then in turn allows for the future phases to happen.
And it's important before we leave this one page that you'll see little asterisks next to both Rippling Woods and Quarterfield. They're designated as flex phases. They can actually be done in isolation and do not necessarily have to be done in this sequence. This is the sequence that the consulting team arrived at. But in fact, because they are, in a way, isolated away from the other construction activities, should funding, board directives, et cetera, all transpire differently, those two can either be flipped or done out of sequence in some other manner. And that's going to be true of the other three options as well.
And that's also because, to highlight what was said earlier, Alex, because we can build on site. We don't have to relocate those elementaries while we're doing this phasing.
Exactly.
We can build new buildings on site.
Yes.
Exactly. And just to build on that point a little bit, the icons, the graphics that you see here are actually prototypical sort of templates, a kit of parts, if you will, for each of the different school properties to maintain consistency across the board on all the different options. So in this case, we're using the current evolving Anne Arundel County elementary prototype that you'll see for Rippling Woods and Quarterfield. We're using we worked with Public Schools Planning Department to look at the most recent ed specs for middle school and high schools and identified ones that we had done in another county that were very close to your square footage and your student population as sort of placeholders, if you will, to demonstrate how a middle school and high school would flesh out in these different schemes. And they're going to be consistent throughout all of the design options. If I could actually just flip to option 2. This one is very similar to option 1 in that it utilizes all 4 of the properties available to us in the master plan study. It also strives to achieve all of the program elements as well. The major difference between these two is that the CTE program, CAT North, instead of being on the north side of that right-of-way above Old Mill High, is now on the south side of that right-of-way. To create more of a secondary educational campus, if you will, and more proximity between it and Old Mill High School. Just to point out a couple of the negatives here is that this happens to sit, the new CAT North building shown in light blue here happens to sit on a major utility right away through that site, so that would require some extensive utility relocations, which is why we looked at the option 1 alternative. If we could flip to option 3. Option 3, the major difference here is that we took the CAT North site out of the equation for new development. So you'll see CAT North shown in light blue there as a revitalization. What that means is it's, again, no longer available for new development. So the new middle school, Old Mill Middle School North that we had been showing in the other 2 options now moves over to the Old Mill property. So that creates proximity between the middle school and the high school on that same parcel. The Papa John's and Southgate properties are identical to the previous options. We can switch to option 4, please. Again, dialing back yet again, option 4 looks at taking the CAT North property and the Papa John's property offline to see what can we do with the least amount of land utilization, utilizing only Quarterfield, Old Mill, and the Southgate Park sites. And we see that forces us to put a lot more buildings and fields on the Old Mill site itself. This equates to actually both new high schools being built on the Old Mill property along with one of the middle schools, which results in a serious sacrifice in fields. We're not able to deliver all of the program elements required by the educational specifications. And then finally, after we considered all these different options with the stakeholder group, we went back and looked at the program objectives that were, project objectives that were established at the beginning and evaluated each of these 4 final options against them to try to determine a recommendation. I'll just highlight categorically the different criteria that we evaluated them against. And just so you can follow along, the green arrows mean that this option is representing an advantage among the others, against the others in that particular category. The gray arrow that goes left and right is simply sort of status quo. It's sort of average among the other options. And the red arrow down or orange arrow down means it's got a negative attribute that needs to be considered. So first and foremost was delivery of the program, trying to achieve and in some cases exceed all of the components of the ed spec, whether it's the building itself, the fields, the parking, the bus loop, all of those components taken as a whole. The reason that option 1 has a green arrow is because not only did it meet all of the program requirements of the ed specs, it also provided some additional fields on the Old Mill property that Recreation and Parks identified as advantageous for their programming, so we kept those online. The second category is the relationship between the buildings. This is, again, looking at things like, does it make sense to have a middle school and high school on the same site? What are the pros and cons of that, as opposed to a CTE and a high school, which have some natural synergies between their 2 programs? So that's why option 1 and 2 have the green arrow in that category. Location of buildings per districts. This is zooming out and looking at the entire master plan as a whole. Are the 2 middle schools, are the 2 high schools, are the 2 elementary schools too close or too far apart to really serve the neighborhoods and communities that they're intended to serve? And in this case, options 1 and 2 had the most advantageous sort of distribution of those high schools and middle schools that was more consistent with the long-term plans of the county. The fourth category is avoiding the 65 DNL contour. This is actually a influence from the Maryland Aviation Administration. We're within 4 miles of BWI Airport, and there are a couple of criteria there that we needed to consider and we're trying to avoid in the planning. 2 of the schemes, option 1 and 2, actually all of the buildings avoided that critical 65 DNL contour. The other ones, while it doesn't create an impossibility for those to be executed, does roll in some other procedural and protocol issues down the road in planning and permitting that we would like to avoid if we can looking forward. Phasing and logistics looks at things like constructability. We looked closely at the existing Old Mill High School Middle School complex. That's going to need to be demoed in phases to be able to keep all those students on site during construction. We'd like to recommend limiting that to a 2-phase demolition and occupation rather than 3-phase if we can. So that's the reason that option 4 is a negative in that category, because it requires a more complex 3-phase demolition of that existing building. Option 1 allows for, again, a more straightforward phasing in logistics and less movement of utilities and other things that complicate the constructability of these options. Overall schedule, we'll get to that in the wrap-up page in a minute. The schedule was fairly consistent we're looking at 9 to 11 year span for all of these phases combined. The one that was notable was, again, option 4, which was going to take a full 2 years longer than some of the options, so we thought that was a notable negative below average of the others. Overall cost, you'll see, is very similar. Again, the order of magnitude of the dollars involved as we did the projected cost estimates was fairly similar, not enough to show an advantage in any one particular option. If I can ask you to advance to the next slide, this is the, thank you. This is a summary with kind of a icon roadmap of the different sites that were utilized in each of the options. Again, option 1 and 2 utilize all of the sites in orange. Option 3 took Cat North out of the mix. Option 4 took Cat North and the Papa John's Farm site out of the mix. And I'll highlight the first row showing the cost, which you can see is fairly consistent throughout the 4 different options, but we did note that there's a longer schedule duration for option 4 among those 4 options. And then this just shows a roadmap of which schools are on each site and some of the pros and cons and the program highlights delivered in each option. And Alex, any other notes to wrap up?
No, with that, I believe we'll take any questions the board might have.
Dr. Frank?
I believe you mentioned a significant number of years before we are going to be in a position to accomplish this. Could you explain what, if anything, can be done about that? I'm sure ultimately this has to do with the forces in our state government.
Well, so essentially this plan does not take into account the funding required to execute it. So this essentially sought to identify the best combination logistically of how to create the projects to meet the scope, what is the budgeted amount that is required to complete the project in its totality, and what is the duration of time. Now with that information, we do have a capital improvement program that, as a result of the MGT report, does in fact contain almost all of the schools, save for the Cat North program, CTE program, is already in the CIP. That then is going to have to be retooled, recalibrated going forward, depending on the outcome of deliberations over this set of recommendations, to better inform the CIP, not the one that's before us this year, because we're not asking for any funding in FY18, but it would help us through conversations with the Superintendent Board recalibrate our CIP on a going forward basis, as well as then enter into that dialogue with our county and state funding officials. As you can see, the costs to execute these projects range from $705 million up to $730 million. That's simply for these projects, not even taking into account any of the other needs of the school district or county government or state government. So it's going to require significant investment of public resources, and that's why it was critical that we partner, for example, with the county government, so that not only they but the public at large is fully informed in terms of a long-range view, Dr. Frank, of what are the amount of resources that are going to be necessary, so you can begin putting the things in place, such as what size bond sales, which projects do we have to complete and pay off in advance, which projects could possibly be moved around, are there alternative funding strategies that may be deployed. So this is really the beginning to essentially quantify the size of this public works project, and then now armed with this information, we can sequentially begin having the dialogue with the funding officials, with the broader community at large, et cetera.
What would it take for us to try to complete these projects, or I should say start the projects in a shorter period of time? Does that require dialogue with the state, the comptroller? How do we try to move these projects forward?
Sure. So it begins with an approved, adopted capital improvement program upon the recommendation of the superintendent from this board. That document then would get transmitted to both the state and the county officials. They then obviously would rely heavily on their fiscal advisors, be it the county budget officer or be it the state Department of Management and Budget, et cetera, to begin to find the resources on their end. I think it was described earlier, save for two of these projects, which is Rippling Woods and Quarterfield, that can be done in isolation. The rest of these projects are integrally linked, and by that I mean once you get the ball rolling, you've got to go all the way to completion. So it is going to require a commitment from all parties, the state, the county, the school system, et cetera, that we're going to commit to executing this project over X span number of years. But again, understand that with the exception of Quarterfield or Rippling, it's all or nothing. Once we get going, we absolutely have got to continue down this path because, as Kieran so eloquently described, it's a well-choreographed dance of build, demolish, build, demolish, build, demolish, all the way across. We have to maintain all of these youngsters in their current schools. We don't have anywhere to relocate them. And so it takes a significant amount of funding commitment. It will take a significant amount of cooperation from the school communities, from the school faculty, administrators, et cetera. But again, I think that, this is sort of day one, where we can now begin those dialogues, not just with the public sector folks, but with the private, public and private sector folks to say, this is what we all need to become prepared for. This is the information and the trajectory of this project, so we can all sort of plan accordingly over the course of what's going to ultimately transpire to be a 9 to 11 year. From the day we start, it's going to take 9 to 11 years to complete.
If I could also add to that, Dr. Frank, that response, that it's not just capital money, and Mr. Sheknovich has referred to it, as we go through this process, this 10-year process of dismantling and rebuilding these whole Old Mill complex, including the elementary schools in Cat North. We'll have to build in over several years' time operating budget. So as we, for example, split Old Mill High School, that's an operating budget, right? Once the building's built, you then have to staff that building and have the right science equipment and athletic equipment and so on, and that has to be built into an operating budget. Also understand that it's not just about if money were available, we can move it forward. We have to have a team that can manage this, right? So when you start to peel away layers of this onion, this could possibly be 7 buildings in play. And we have to have a management team that can manage all the construction. We have construction going on now. And so it has to be put into it's got to be very sequential, not only for the students, but also the staff that's going to be managing all of these projects at the same time.
Mrs. Birch.
I have a few questions. First, can you remind me how many students are at the current Old Mill?
Currently, we have approximately 2,300.
Okay, and what are we projecting the size of each of the new Old Mills would be?
We modeled them with a not to exceed 1,700 student capacity. That is essentially again, as you recall, the MGT organization recommended around 1,700. The state task force recommended around 1,600.
So we'd be pulling from somewhere else as well. It wouldn't just be splitting up the Old Mill students. It would be redistricting from somewhere else as well.
And more importantly, essentially, we very purposely stress test this master plan, because if we know that we can fit a 1,700 school, should we decide to only build a 1,500 school, we know we can make that work. So we wanted to test worst case to make sure that we could adequately accommodate whatever the decisions and recommendations are, and then we can always right size it as we continue to fine tune.
But even if you built 1,500 students, that would still be room for 3,000 students, which is still more than the current 2,300, which still leaves room for 700 additional students, more than Old Mill is currently handling.
Correct, and that will be through a combination of, there is growth and development in that area we have to take into account. There is the natural demographic uptrend. We continue to aggregate more students year over year.
Probably not 700 worth.
Correct. And then finally, it will create opportunities where we can look at redistricting options to better utilize and relieve some enrollment pressures that we have at some adjacent schools as well in the out years. So I think this really would help largely not just the Old Mill community, but ultimately could greatly aid both the Glen Burnie, the North County, the Meade High School situation, et cetera, as we look at some of those downrange rebalancing options.
Okay. My next question, it seems odd to me that the most expensive option seems to be the least desirable option. I mean, was that odd to you, or is that a typical kind of thing in a study like this?
No, it's not an oddity at all, and as you can probably well imagine or recall, we have done feasibility studies for as long as you and I have both been in these positions, Ms. Burge, and the natural inclination is, well, my oh my, a renovation is always the most cost effective, but how many times have we found that in fact that is true?
Right.
Thankfully, we picked the lesser cost option. But how many times have we found that it's not the case? And really taking a look here, time is money, that old adage. So one of the biggest drivers is that in a way, least impactful to landmass option actually has an 11-year, 4-month duration. So you've got to staff and supply and outfit that job, and the time value of money greatly impacts that. That's one. But really, the second piece is that, again, being able to take down the Old Mill complex in 2 phases instead of having to take it down in 3 phases, there's a significant amount of value that's tied up in that logistical consideration from a constructability perspective.
Okay, my next question is about the Papa John's property, and I apologize because I walked in here just a little bit late. Now that this is public, that this is under consideration, I guess I want to know if we have some sort of agreement with them that if we decide, or the county has an agreement with them, that if we decide to move forward with this, we already have an agreement that we have an option to use their land so that everybody's not swooping in trying to buy their land right now.
So there is no agreement in place. The appropriation authority was granted upon a recommendation of the county executive. The county council did, in fact, appropriate funds in a county C-class project towards this. It is a county government-run project, the acquisition side of it. They have the subject matter expertise within their right-of-ways division that we do not have in-house. We have communicated collectively, both the school district and the county government, with the legal representation for the ownership interests of that property. They have given us permission to go onto their property, not just as part of this study, to survey, to do environmental assessments as well, but they have authorized us, being in this case the right-of-way division of county government, to undertake an appraisal of the property that the county did in fact retain the services of a professional appraiser, and the results of that study were conveyed to the ownership interests of the land and the ownership interest of the what we colloquially call the Papa John farm property is in receipt of that, and they've been invited to participate in contract sale negotiations with the county government. Okay. And that is the status that we're at. So they've been provided the results of the assessment, the appraisal assessment, and now the ball proverbially is in their courts as we speak here today.
And my only other comment is that on page 77, I guess it's option 4, I think you need to rename which one's Old Mill West and which one's Old Mill, because it looks like Old Mill is a little further west than Old Mill West.
It's a great comment. That I think that was actually more of a sequencing issue.
I'm just saying.
Right. Old Mill, what's labeled as Old Mill High in that case replaces what's now known as Old Mill High School. Old Mill West is the second high school sequentially to be built.
Yeah, but they're going to get a lot of ribbing if.
You're absolutely right. Whether that's the name on the building in the end.
Yeah, I don't think you can call it Old Mill West.
Yeah, those names are placeholders, just like we, for example, call it the Crofton Area High School. Who knows what that's ultimately going to be? Who knows what ultimately the two buildings that we're calling, just for convenience, East and West Old Mill are going to be.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hummer.
My first question, what is a specimen tree? I kept seeing that in there, that we have to replace the specimen trees.
Right. It's a tree of a certain caliper identified by the Department of Natural Resources as needing special care if it's going to be demolished. So,
okay. My other one, why is the Old Mill High School, they appear to be kind of identical, but the Old Mill High School cost is about $17 million more than the Old Mill West. What's the difference in cost there between the two?
Are you looking at any particular option?
Well, just even at option 1, it says New Old Mill West High School, $148 million. It says New Old Mill High School, $177 million.
Sure. If you take a look at the site plans for those, the amount of field accoutrements and site development activities that would occur on the property that we own today, the one that has the BG&E transmission line, so there's more fields, there's more parking spaces, et cetera. There's a lot of more site development there. You can much more effectively what we call the Old Mill West, which is a new ground up construction. We're hitting essentially virgin ground. So there's no demolition required there. We're just hitting dirt. The utilities are very close. We can build that very fast and very efficiently. There's not as much site to redevelopment. There's not asbestos that we have to deal with, et cetera. So it's a compilation of a lot of things, but when you're starting with what we call greenfield development, just virgin land building up, we can build it cheaper and quicker.
Okay. And one other one. In option 1, there is an extra stadium. What would that be used for?
So we had the luxury in option 1, and again, really this just happens to be the optimization of the property. We have an existing stadium complex there at the school. You'll note that, however, it is a significant walk from the school if you know where the school sits today. And in fact, it actually would become more burdensome in the new plan as well. So we thought under all scenarios, we contemplated a new stadium complex to be built for both high schools. So both high schools will have a new stadium complex. However, in option 1, again, just given the layout of the land, we saw an opportunity to salvage the bulk of the existing stadium. And the intended use of that stadium, while obviously our youngsters could use it during the day, that really would become an asset for the Recreation and Parks Department. So in option 1, there's actually more fields than would be required if it was simply an AACPS project. There's also another stadium, which is, again, the rehabilitated stadium that currently exists. Recreation and Parks Department, unit of county government, has a Rec and Parks master plan for the whole county. And they've identified this center quadrant of the county as one that is tremendously devoid of adequate recreational spaces, given the demography of that area. They simply do not have enough courts, basketball courts, football fields, soccer fields, etc. And looking at this collectively, remember, we're going to be taking over one of their parks, Southgate, right? So we're trying to optimize from a public perspective. How can we get the most public good out of this? Not just for the school district myopically, but if we look at this collectively, how could the citizens of Anne Arundel County, Ms. Hummer, come out the furthest ahead? And to the extent that we can partner with Rec and Parks and we get what we need out of it and they get as much out of it as they would have, plus anything else that helps fill in some of the gaps in their master plan, it really turns out, again, to sort of be that win-win aspect to it.
Thank you.
For the benefit of the public, tell us what happens next. This is a review item, so we're obviously not voting on options today.
Correct. Right, and we're not asking you to take a position. We would anticipate that over the course of the ensuing weeks or months, likely you would have some conversations with Dr. Arlotto and staff. We can certainly talk about that more at greater length as well as part of our workshop. The intent is that we have a CIP that's currently in play. It's the one before you today. That is uninfluenced by this body of work, as this is really an out year. But the intent is over the course of the next few plus months, that by the time we get around to developing the CIP that this board will consider next year, that we really will have the results of the study. We'll have essentially an idea of what the county and the state are willing to fund in the current year, plus we'll have some information, because this document is going to be shared with state and county officials. You saw it first, but they will be getting it probably tomorrow, so that they can begin having discussions at the staff level there, and again begin communicating with us. We want to get this out to the public as well as broadly as possible, so that the communities clearly understand what the options are and can begin being armed with the information to engage sort of in a productive dialogue with us. So I think, we're going to leave here today with a lot of moving parts, with the goal of sort of having all of these various paths merge back again no later than this time next year, when we have to entertain the next CIP document. And
do we know when the Papa John's negotiation, the goal is to wrap that up for the land?
No, it's in the works, as I said. There is no definitive timeline for that. Certainly, depending on which option we pursued, if we pursued option 4, it's immaterial. With the other 3, we would certainly need the property the day before we broke ground. So there's some time for that to transpire.
And before someone else buys it, like Mrs. Birch said.
Correct.
Okay. I have one public comment card, Kristen Etzel.
Good afternoon, Dr. Arlotto, President Korbelak, and members of the board. My name is Kristen Etzel. I have a son in 4th grade and a daughter in kindergarten at Rippling Woods Elementary School. I'm speaking up today in support of funding for design and construction of the Old Mill High School, Old Mill Middle Schools, and Rippling Woods Elementary. We have a group of parents, neighbors, and friends also in support of this funding, and we will continue to attend board and county council meetings to speak up for our schools. My kids are young, so my firsthand experience of the school buildings is related to Rippling Woods. The open classrooms result in a very loud and distracting environment. And these are not open classrooms in groups of 2 or 3. These are pods of 6 or 7 or more open classrooms in one area, separated from each other by only 5-foot-tall cubicle walls. Many classrooms have no access to natural light. My son's 3rd grade classroom was so small there was no possibility of different desk arrangements or flexibility for the teacher. Not to mention that security drills require kids to hide under desks, as not all the classrooms have closets to shelter in place. Old Mill High School is also an open concept school with thin metal partitions separating classrooms, resulting in a very noisy environment. I've also heard many stories of kids and parents on back to school night getting lost trying to locate classrooms even with a map. According to the 2015 MGT Strategic Facilities Utilization Master Plan and the ranking of the master plan priorities, the Old Mill schools in Rippling Woods occupy the number 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 priority slots. My intent in speaking today is to request that this 2015 priority list is followed and that Old Mill schools retain their place in line for funding. I feel the need to speak up to advocate for funding because of the history of Old Mill school funding that I have been able to piece together. It is my understanding that an earlier 2006 study by MGT listed Old Mill among the top priorities. However, the Old Mill project was not started at that time because of lack of money due to the recession, as well as the size and complexity of the project. It is obvious from the just published master plan study that this is a huge undertaking. It's a large, complex project, but I tell my kids all the time that we can do hard things. As an example, I'm here speaking in public, which is not my favorite pastime, but I will speak up for my kids and for all the students. I've reviewed the Old Mill master plan study discussed today, and I'm pleased to see an in-depth, comprehensive master plan. I interpret this as a welcome and positive sign that these projects will continue to move forward with design and construction. In reviewing the current fiscal year 18 budget and 6-year plan, my question relates to the timing of the initial design and construction fees for the Old Mill Complex schools. Last year's 6-year plan included fiscal year 18 design funding for both Rippling Woods and Old Mill West High School. The fiscal year 18 budget presented today has pushed these funds to fiscal year 19, thus pushing the project start out 1 year. With a comprehensive study already in hand, why is there a delay in funding? I will continue to speak up at board meetings as well as county council meetings to ask that the Old Mill schools retain their place in line for funding so that these important projects are not delayed. Thank you.
Mrs. Birch.
I just want to thank you for sticking it out all day because I know you had to wait a long time to speak on this.
Is there anyone else that would like to provide comment?
Hi, Claudia O'Keefe, parent. My son currently goes to Old Mill Middle South. It does take some working out to get through the corridors, but they manage. It's a good challenge for them. I just wanted to request, if it's at all possible, it would be helpful. I know in the MGT study, the feeder system for the new Old Mill West is proposed to include 2 or 3 Glen Burnie elementary schools, a couple of Old Mill elementary schools, and I think a Meade area school. And if that's still the case, I think it would be helpful if there were an exhibit that showed that. I was looking through the study for this project, and it showed the existing feeder system for the existing Old Mill High School, and this new school, I believe, is going to include a change. And I think it would be helpful for families looking at the plan if they could see the proposed feeder system and how that feeds into these new schools and where they're located. That's just a suggestion. I think it would be helpful because it impacts families not just in the Old Mill district, but if you're going to district in Meade and Glen Burnie schools also, they're going to be impacted by this plan also. That's all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 5.02, award of contracts. This is also just a review item. Are there any board questions or comments? Are there any public comments? Okay. And the last item on the agenda are 2 consent items. Do I have a motion to move 6.01 and 6.02 from information to action?
Second.
All those in favor? We now have an action item. Dr. Arlato, your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I recommend that the Board of Education award contracts as listed on today's agenda 6.01 and 6.02.
Mrs. Hummer.
Yes, I was just looking at the first and second round scores on these, and they were fairly close in the first round, but then Discovery kind of blew Navia away in the second round. Could we get some, what was the big difference there between those?
Good afternoon, Alex Shackno, Chief Operating Officer. So essentially, this is a multi-step proposal evaluation process. So we have a multidisciplinary team that's the evaluators on it. In any of these solicitations, we put out a specification that describes the steps or the sequence that is to be followed, and we give them in rather exacting detail to a high degree of specificity how we want those responses structured. So essentially in this solicitation, there's 3 parts to it. The first round is a static submission, which is essentially a binder filled with information that contains the exact elements that we've asked them to respond to. So that static exhibit is reviewed first by the evaluation team, culled through and matched, benchmarked against the decision-making rubric or the algorithm that was prescribed. Again, that is telegraphed to all the bidders so they know how they're going to get evaluated. And that essentially is a first cut to allow us to rank order the entities that appear to have a good chance to be successful going on. The second step then is to invite the ones that score higher essentially to an in-person interview and demonstration. It gives us the ability to now, not just on paper, but to actually see a demonstration of the product, take a look at how that looks to us as administrators, how that will look to our employees on the receiving end, what kind of reports can they generate, what are the security features of their system. We are dealing with financial assets here and sensitive information. So some people call it a dog and pony show. I've heard it referred to that in the past. But really, that second cut is an in-face demonstration and a much deeper dive by individuals that are from our Human Resources Department, from our Budget Office, from our Technology Department, all querying the individuals. And you've probably witnessed in your own experience, Ms. Hummer, that something looks nice in a catalog or may look nice on paper, but then when you actually go and kick the tires or go to the store and use it, it's not everything you thought. So it's not uncommon that, again, that's why we do it. So it's really a three-part scoring. So the first part is, how does it look statically on paper? Now, how does it look live? Plus, again, we can ask much more in-depth clarifying questions. And I'm only going to focus on security because of the sensitivity of the information here. That is a big deal, not just to HR and budget, but our technology folks. So that then we rescore them now based on this much deeper dive. And then the third and final element is the cost of the product. We telegraphed to everybody in this solicitation that 70% of the value of the composite evaluative score was tied to that technical evaluation, those two parts. The remaining 30% was tied to the pricing proposal of the product, and that's how we arrived at the responsive vendor that's being proposed for award today.
So a perfect example of cheapest is not always best, and that we want to make sure that we're getting the highest quality product that will meet our needs.
Right, and
we will, in the long run, we would pay more if we got something for less money that didn't meet our needs.
Absolutely, and the state, for select areas, the State Procurement Act does, in fact, under the education article, does in fact allow us to do multi-step and technical solicitations that are of this nature. And it's exactly to the point. Some things are much more complex to buy. We're not simply buying a number 2 pencil that we could probably get a pretty good idea just off of a paper copy of what it really looked like. But these are very complex procurements, and the education article understands that the owner, us, and the user, the unions behind us, et cetera, for this sensitive of a project, really require the opportunity to really look under the hood and make sure that we're getting what, A, not only will function the best, B, fulfill the needs of the organization and the employees, and then finally do it in a responsible fiscal manner.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Is there any public comment? All those in favor? Motion passes 7-0-0. I just have a couple of announcements. The board will hold a workshop on our FY 2018 CIP and capital budget at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, September 13th. And the public is welcome to attend, but no testimony will be taken. The next board budget committee is Wednesday, September 21st at 4:30 p.m. The next Board of Education meeting is Wednesday, September 21st at 7 p.m., and that will include a public hearing on the FY 2018 CIP and capital budget where we will accept public testimony. And the next Board Policy Committee meeting is Wednesday, September 28th at 1 p.m. Mrs. Hummer.
Yes, I move that we close the open session to move into closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice on a legal matter.
All those in favor? All right, this concludes the public portion of our meeting. Thank you.